Hello and welcome to today's webinar, The Hidden Connections That Win Consumers in a Divided World. My name is Cheryl Auger, Senior Director here at Lux Research. I'm going to moderate today's session. Presenting today, I have my amazing colleagues, Alina Strugut, Research Director and Principal Analyst, and Joshua Haslun, Senior Director, both here at Lux as well. Throughout the webinar, please be sure to type in any questions that you have in the questions box on your screen. Time permitting, we will answer all the questions that we can. If your question doesn't get answered today, please don't worry. Please be sure to email us at questions@luxresearch.com and we will respond as soon as possible. To remind you, that's questions@luxresearch.com, and we welcome all of your questions today. If at any point you have some technical difficulties, such as a frozen screen, simply refresh your browser and check that your internet connection is strong. Now, without further ado, let's jump into today's presentation.
Thanks, Cheryl. So today we're talking about these hidden connections that win consumers in a divided world. And why is this important? Let's face it, we have more of a divided world than we've ever had before ahead of us. And that creates a lot of significant challenges, especially for positioning products, positioning innovation, for changes that are largely potentially nationalistic moving forward. And on top of that, we have to make some key decisions. And let's face it, we have to make a lot of assumptions. And when we make assumptions, which let's face it, as people and humans, we are giant assumption calculating machines, everything from our sense of smell and what we think about that to our vision, to how we think about the world. We make a lot of assumptions in every moment. And as a result, we need to correct those. We need to make sure we're following through with the appropriate information from disparate experts in order to come up with something that can align, particularly in the case of thinking about a divided world. So for today, the first thing we're going to be talking about is, well, how can we balance broad appeal with local nuance without taking a one-size-fits-all approach? And let's face it, often we focus on demographics, things like that. But how do we balance that? How do we tie in and correct our assumptions in order to improve that ability? So we'll start thinking about that. We're then going to say, well, what's a way to move forward? Today we're going to be presenting is the idea of local belief-based segmentation, how we can use that to identify opportunities in competitive markets and identify things that are shared across markets that maybe we would have thought, or assumed, I should say, aren't connected at all. So we can have a path forward both on how we position those for the market, as well as the technologies we align. And that leads us into the final piece, which is taking that belief-based segmentation and identifying the technologies, the stories that allow us to create sustainable innovation. And what do I mean when I say sustainable innovation? Things that resonate, they scale, and they endure. That's really what we want. We want to move away from novelty and have businesses that last. And so with that, I want to pass it to my colleague, Alina, to talk a little bit more about this global innovation trap that we're talking about today. Alina?
Thank you, Josh. All right. So we all know that consumer preferences are shifting faster than ever. And here's a game that most brands are stuck playing. They try to scale fast, but also stay relevant. And honestly, it's not really working that easy, because on one hand, you want global reach. You want one big message, one clean strategy, something that looks amazing in the boardroom. But on the other hand, what about consumers? Consumers want something that feels personal, feels relevant, real, like it was made for them. So what happens? Well, you go too broad, and boom, you lose that emotional punch. What crushes it in Chicago might totally flop it in Beijing. But then you swing the other way and you hyper-target every microgroup based on age, income, star sign, favorite pasta shape. and you just create noise, because demographics really, they only tell you who somebody is, but not why they care. And without that why, your insights are shallow and your innovation really ends up just checking boxes, but it's not something that lands and it's not something that lasts. So that's why we always take a different approach. This is why we always start with belief-based segmentation, because beliefs helps us find that emotional and cultural truth that actually moves people, the kind of things that scales and sticks. Because this one size fits all, well, it looks great on paper, but it doesn't fit anybody in real life. So what happens when brands get the why right, and what happens when they get it wrong? Well, take Hershey in China. They assumed the one-size-fits-all model that, and they assumed that American taste was universal. So they took an American-sized chocolate and messaging to a market with very, very different flavor preferences, with different rituals around chocolate, and they assumed that this would translate, and they didn't. So the response was cool reception, low emotional resonance. Now, contrast that with Ferrero Rocher, who, rather than imposing the Western template, they really tried to capture that cultural nuance. They really sought to align with China's gifting traditions, with the codes for premiumization. Just think about that golden packaging, the layered experience, the symbolism of abundance. It all resonated. And not surprisingly, the result was widespread popularity and a lot of emotional connection. So how do we get it wrong? How do we get it right? How do we get that why? The key is, as I mentioned, to move beyond surface level traits and really tap into beliefs. And also take it one step further and ask ourselves, what if we use those beliefs to find shared emotional ground between groups that seem worlds apart? And then how do we turn those that common ground into innovation that actually sticks and scales? So just a few words of what we did for this analysis. We began with a deliberate tension, that between Gen Z and boomers. Why? Well, they're typically viewed as opposites. They're viewed as having different values, different habits, different playbooks. But that's exactly why we studied them, because we wanted to show that age alone isn't enough to segment people meaningfully. And and we studied these two apparently different groups in 3 different countries, in the US, in Germany, and in China. And here's what we did. We took these groups and we decoded what chocolate means to each one of them in each geography. Based on that, we identified the shared belief-based drivers, and then we measured where consensus was strongest. Because honestly, not all 21-year-olds think alike, and neither do all boomers. And we did all that so that we are able to uncover the emotional triggers that are able to transcend both generations and borders. And here's a quick look at the drivers that we found. So this was what came up over and over again across generations and in the 3 countries. So the first is indulgence. Think of it as chocolate as a reward or as an emotional reset. Sustainability, which is about chocolate that reflects my values and my ethics. Artisanal, which is chocolate that feels premium, it's crafted, it's thoughtful. Then we looked at adventure, which is chocolate that sparks curiosity, that surprises me, that excites me. And then finally, social connection, which is chocolate that brings people together, right? So it's about the care, the sharing, the ritual around it. And what we found out in our research is that this really aren't just preferences. they're really powerful emotional levers for innovation. And we're going to show you how. So let's start with the analysis in the US. And what we found in the US is that chocolate is more than a treat. It's really a mood. Now, for a second, take a look at the maturity curve in the middle of the slide. And that's where we mapped where each of the 5 drivers that I just mentioned, where they land based on how much consensus there is amongst consumers from early stage new ideas all the way to well understood established ideas. And what stands out is that for both generations, indulgence and adventure are the strongest consensus points. They both land in the mainstream acceptance zone, which is what we also call the zone of innovation, because it really hits this cultural sweet spot where ideas are familiar enough to resonate, but they're still fresh enough to evolve. And this is the moment when consumers are open to new expressions and they're most likely to embrace innovation. So if you think about it, this is not just a signal. This is really an opportunity for brands. Now, enough of the theory. Let's hear the people behind the analysis. So meet Taylor, 22 from Portland. For her, chocolate is expressive. It's a vibe. It's a mood booster. It's a colorful escape. She says chocolate should reflect how I feel, bold, vibrant, and a little unexpected. Now, for Taylor, indulgence goes hand in hand with stimulation and sensory play. Like, think about bold flavors, crunchy textures, arty packaging. Adventure for her it's all about the unexpected. Matcha, chili, seaweed, anything that flips the script. Now, turn to Michael, 64 from Minneapolis. Now, Michael treats chocolate as one of life's simple pleasures. And his take is, well, chocolate should make me smile, rich, smooth, and a little surprising. So, unlike Taylor, Michael's version of indulgence is about its elegance, its smooth textures, heritage flavors. Adventure for him is subtle, but it's thoughtful, right? A citrus note, a savory layer. He doesn't want anything wild. What he wants nuance. He wants nostalgia with a twist also. So despite the 40+ year gap between Taylor and Michael, what they're doing, they're both chasing the same emotional high. They just take different roads to get there. So for one, it's bold, it's expressive, it's experimental. For the other, it's familiar, it's refined, it's quietly surprising. But underneath it all, it's really the same emotional trigger. Like they want chocolate that makes them feel something, whether it's joy, comfort, curiosity. They're using chocolate as a sensorial trigger. So how do we connect these generations? Well, it's not really with catchy slogans, but it's with using chocolate as a mood board, right? And the opportunity here is to design multi-sensory treats that just match how people feel, right? Some want bold, others prefer subtle, but both are driven by the same emotional need, right? The key is to tell one emotional story, just style it differently for each group. And let's hear what Josh has to say about what that means for innovation.
That's right. And when we think about innovation, we're going to be thinking about innovation that relies on kind of emerging technologies here, right? We want to say, where should we be looking in the future, as well as thinking about now as far as what's ready now and what's that look like. Now, as we consider this idea of beliefs to breakthroughs, we're going to focus on the US here. So again, mood alignment in the US. What are the technologies, things going on that happen here? And the two areas we're going to focus on are functional ingredients, so the things that create flavor, texture, form, these things that are paramount to creating emotion, right? But it's not just about those functional ingredients, because where you get them matters, what they are matters, they affect formulation. So there's a potential to need another layer, and something we call ingredient informatics, which is the idea of connecting your ingredients, your supply chain, together in ways that allow you to be agile and create smart formulation. And so how does this relate to innovation momentum? What's going on? If we look at the right, we have our Lux Tech signal. This is a summary of trends and patents and papers and funding, a lot of other data that we collect on innovators about what that momentum looks like. And this is a leading indicator. So things that happen here are an early indication of progress. So if we look at the basic trends, let's say in ingredient informatics in the light green, you can see that there's a sharp trajectory upwards, and there's kind of a peak that tails off. And you might think to yourself, well, you know, if it's tailing off a little bit, maybe we don't want to pay attention. But remember, as a leading indicator of early stage innovation, that peak in step over actually often indicates productization. So this means that companies are actually utilizing this to be more agile in their formulation. And in addition, you'll notice I have a couple arrows at the end of the graph. Why are those there? Well, let's face it, there's a lot going on in the US right now. Policy is targeting wellness. We're targeting synthetic ingredients, particularly those developed from petrochemical or other synthetic production systems, and trading those potentially for natural ingredients. And this affects, in particular, our functional ingredients. Many companies have already had to shift and change ingredients, whether it's chocolate or other areas. Now, chocolate itself, the premium versions, right, have very few ingredients. And can we overcome and create alternatives to cocoa butter? Well, right now the reality is no. But if we think about the snacking industry, a huge and growing opportunity that companies are focused on, there's a lot of ways to think about the use of chocolate in those snacking opportunities. And that's where we see the big opportunity for technology to have an impact outside of simply creating new formulations that align best to what consumers want. So if we think about an example here, we can take an internal and an external example. So internal meaning US, external meaning let's look abroad. And we always need to do that when we think about innovation, because where innovation happens changes. And we see that happening in the US right now, where in the US, you know, there's a need for ingredients that work and work today because there's replacements that need to be made. This is why I bring up a company like Barossa Foods. Now, you know, if you look at this company's website, you'll notice that they're going through some changes and shifting and noting that they're taking a break in developing products. Well, why am I bringing up Barossa Foods then? I'm bringing it up because there's opportunities as funding decreases in a region to actually bring up and grab assets at relatively low costs. We've already seen this with companies like Consumer Genomics. 23andMe just got purchased the other day. But these are real opportunities in the US and potentially a divergence from the way US was investing in technology. So there may be an interesting opportunity to grab what you can as far as the functional ingredients that you didn't think you could access cheaply, and now perhaps you have a pathway there. Alternatively, we can look abroad for innovation, particularly in regions that are more hotspots. And right now, Singapore remains a hotspot for food. Companies like Mycosortia are using ways to generate new functional ingredients by using microbes to actually make them more readily usable in a lot of diverse applications. And that's exactly what Mycosortia is doing. They use a tofu-based waste ingredient and create texturizers that add chewiness, add these different textures to chocolate ingredients to make them more interesting to clients. So what we're saying here is that there are a lot of opportunities. You need to select the right one for the US market. If you're looking for long-term innovation, right, you may actually in the US want to think broad because that's where a lot of the innovation is happening. If you need a now thing, consider looking for startups that might not make it because they could be easy access to assets in the future.
Great. Now let's move to Germany. And we see that in Germany, the story shifts, and it shifts from emotion to ethics. And again, we looked at the same five belief drivers, but here the strongest overlap is on indulgence and sustainability. And that really tells us something. And it tells us that in Germany, pleasure isn't separate from principles. Well, it's actually built on them. Take Lina, 23, Berlin. She says, well, if it's not sustainable, it's not me. So unequivocally, for her, indulgence has to align with values. She checks for She wants to make sure that her chocolate is vegan, that it doesn't have any palm oil. Fair trade is a given. Recyclable packaging is non-negotiable. She even checks QR codes about the cocoa farmers in Ghana. For her, if it feels ethical, then it's a yes. If it doesn't, then she's out. Then meet Heinz, 66, Munich. He says that chocolate should be grounded, trustworthy, and proudly made. So Heinz values brands that he's known for years. He's not really interested in doing research. He doesn't have the time or the passion for it. What he wants instead, he wants to see clear marks of credibility right there front and center on the packaging. And luckily for him, these are quite common in Germany. So he's looking for things like Ökotest, Grünepunkt, Günstig, and he wants to see it right there on the packaging. No marketing fluff, nothing, just proof. So while Lina and Heinz, while they take different routes, they really land on the same outcome, which is trust. Lina gets it through transparency. Heinz gets it through consistency. But at the end, it's all about trust. So in Germany, chocolate is about principled pleasure. It's about quality. It's about character. It's about conscious choices. So innovation here must deliver indulgence that feels good, but also indulgence that does good. Right? So this is the innovation space. It's indulgent, but it's also grounded and it's ethical. Yeah. So let's see what that means for brands out there.
Yeah. So, and I think the important thing to note here is that brands can be very different, right? You might be integrated to agriculture, you might not be, you might be very far away from production and just sourcing. So the question is, how do you build trust? What's out there? And how do we think about this across the diversity of organizations that are out there? The reality is maintaining quality and sustainability, understanding those origins requires some improved layer of understanding of your supply chain, and often straight down to the layer of the grower, because when we think about being conscious, some of those decisions are most important. So how can we improve it? What's out there? If you look at the figure on the right, you'll see that agriculture has had a lot of innovation happening, and these digital options are emerging in agriculture, and all of them can connect to resilience. But the reality is everybody's, again, you have a different distance from the actual producer of your ingredients. You might need to be really close, and then you're building precision, soil health. You might even be analyzing trials of new crops that you want to try. You might be middle in the distance. You might be thinking more connected to your supply chain, but not necessarily with the grower. So you're just aligning across the supply chain on reporting and understanding. Or you might be really far away, and you might be thinking, well, we want to do something. So how can we incentivize our supply chain and influence them to do better? Well, the good thing is there's a lot of options in the middle, and most folks listening are probably going to align somewhere in the middle or on the far right of this matter. And there are solutions out there already. Helios, for example, these are classic supply chain reporting organizations that are also beginning now to include a little bit of risk monitoring in your supply chain. So they could say, oh, production might be at risk this year. You either need to help support that through incentivizing or perhaps make some other decisions there and look for other suppliers. That's fine, but let's face it, it's not very innovative. It's run of the mill. So how do we improve trust beyond this? And that's where some of the interesting things happen. We have a lot of monitoring, delivering on trust already happening. And there's even work going on where regional production centers are aligning on this as well, but they also need more of this information across what you see, everything from building precision and soil health to aligning the value chain to incentivizing. So what's out there that can actually achieve all of those things? Well, the good news is we do have some examples. Now, not one company is able to do this yet, but companies are beginning to bring the tools together. NSET, for example, while on its own, it's just like Helios, it can help align across the value chain and help you understand what's going on there. What it can also do is help you create markets to incentivize supply chain resilience through its partnerships with companies like Realize or Proba that help connect carbon sequestration, water use, quality to increased value for the growers as well as down the supply chain, right? Your quality, that trust we were talking about before. Alternatively, they're also working at the farm level with companies like Hyphen or Millpond to build precision soil health and trials and also help those regions improve their agriculture production. Why is that important? Well, if you actually think about it, a cocoa tree, a very small percentage of its seeds actually get, or its flowers actually get pollinated. How can we just improve that to have more chocolate available, more cacao available to do something with? These are some of the challenges that seem, you'd think we'd solve them, but the reality is we haven't. And working with companies that are beginning to pull these tools together, we're able to make new steps moving forward. So really look out for companies like this that are taking the current assets that digital agriculture has produced and making them more usable across more diverse types of organizations. That's a really important area to think about here.
All right, and now let's move to China, where again, chocolate takes on an entirely different role. Again, same lens, but this time it's indulgence and social connection that unite Gen Z and boomers. So that tells us that in China, chocolate isn't just a product, it's really a gesture. Meet Yuti, 21, from Chengdu. She says that chocolate should surprise me like a warm hug and a little love letter all in one bite. So Yuti sees chocolate as more than a snack. For her, it's love in edible form. It's a stand-in for a hug, it's a spark, it's even a bit of a romantic fantasy. She makes DIY surprise boxes filled with themed chocolates for her boyfriend and her bestie. She hunts for what's trending on social media and shares it with her friends. So for it is not just about taste. It's really about turning every bite into a story, a post, a laugh with her friends, right? So for her, gifting chocolate says, I thought of you without really needing to say anything at all. Then meet Tin Hao, 64, from Hangzhou. And for her, chocolate is more of a ritual. It's a few squares after dinner. It's a tin of pralines during Spring Festival. She loves balanced flavors and layered textures, something soothing, never too sweet, never too bitter. She says that chocolate should be honest, dependable, and comforting. It's a quiet way to say I'm here, right? So for her, chocolate is also quiet presence. It's a gift for her grandkids. It's something thoughtful and steady. It's something to ease her own loneliness, right? And here's the shared insight. Chocolate in China is a relational ritual. And whether you're 21 or 64, chocolate really is a way to say, I'm here, right? And successful brands in China, they don't just market the product, they market that gesture, that emotion, right? So chocolate is relationship forward. It's a sweet signal of care. And that's where brands can build resonance. It's by turning every bite into a moment of connection. And this has a lot of implications for innovation, especially when it comes to packaging.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so relationship forward, right? When we think about packaging, what often happens, right? We think about things like QR codes or, stuff like that helps you sort of communicate to the consumer, not helping the consumer communicate to others to create relationship forward. So where do we move forward then? If this isn't necessarily about balanced flavors and textures, where do we go? I think the most interesting area is actually in packaging design. You can see the text signal on the right here, and it's tremendous, right? You've seen two now, and you can see that this is a very large text signal. And we even have that important moment where we see it beginning to move down. And what's more important about it moving down? Again, leading indicator, this means we have productization. This means that innovation effort is being turned into products rather than just long-term innovation. So this is where it gets really exciting. But what does it actually mean? Well, if we're going to use packaging, it's got to have strong benefits. Again, we've talked about relationship forward, and we said, again, we don't just want to have a QR code for novelty to communicate something to say, oh, hey, connect to your friend using our QR code. I mean, that's a lot to rely on the consumer to do. How can you as a company lead them towards that end? This is where design comes in. We've seen generative AI be used in lots of different ways. And one way it is being used is in packaging design. If we think about this with respect to packaging, well, how do we create and help consumer create packaging that allows them to connect? How can we help them build personalized chocolate packages with your products to create that feel rather than a heart-shaped box? There's lots of different ways to do this where you can allow and enable your consumers and customers to select what they want. So it's about them and about their experience, right? About that relationship forward building to do that. And the most interesting thing is that just in the last 2 years, there's companies who are able to achieve this at scale. Pacdora, Zenpack, these companies that have developed design software to help you develop the packaging systems that align with scaled packaging production to create flexible, agile packaging that, again, can hit this relationship forward moment, which has never really been, we've never been able to do that outside of, just providing an open pack for somebody. So this is a future that, perhaps you didn't anticipate could be here now, but it is here now. And so, really look into this. These types of companies are really interesting. And again, great use of generative AI and something that we may not have been able to do just a few years ago, and now we are. So, as we think about this, I think hopefully now you've seen that we've shown that same driver has a lot of different meanings. We've talked about indulgence, but let's face it, if you were to just say, indulgence is the important thing, you would have failed on a lot of different levels across each of these regions. And that's important, but also we showed connections between two populations that we thought were different people. But actually, there's some evergreen opportunities here to create products that align specifically to them. Indulgent matters, but the meaning of indulgence is shaped by what else matters too: adventure, trust, connection for Gen Z or for boomers alike. Great opportunities identified here that we can move forward with. And I want to pass it to Alina here to leave you with some final takeaways as we think about what this actually means in action for you all moving forward.
Right. So as Josh just mentioned, indulgence is shared, but it's never something that stands alone. It's always shaped by what else matters in culture. And if you think about it, consumers don't form beliefs in a vacuum. It's not something that you engineer in a lab. Beliefs are formed in context. And it's really that context that can make or break a message or a product or a campaign, right? And that's why there's no one size fits all, even when the emotional driver is the same. So the first key takeaway is that brands need to be able to blend global strategy with local meaning, because you can have the best global message out there, but if it doesn't feel personal to people on the ground, it's just noise. The real magic really happens when you take those big ideas and then you translate them into local rituals, into culture, into what people actually care in their day-to-day.
I completely agree.
Second, beliefs are really the real glue that brings people together across generations and geographies. So Gen Z and boomers, they might shop differently or they might use different apps, but deep down, they still crave the same stuff. They crave comfort, connection, trust. And when you focus on those shared beliefs, you are able to find that powerful common ground that brings them together. And then third, when brands listen to those beliefs and not just trends, that's when technology becomes a tool for meaning. Right? Smart packaging, precision sourcing, functional ingredients, they only work when they deliver on what consumers expect emotionally.
That's right. And I think the the other part of the making tech beliefs for this final key takeaway is neither Alina nor myself could have done this alone. I needed her expertise as an anthropologist. She needed my expertise as a technologist to bring that together. So that's why we really say, don't stop there, right? Tech does make beliefs actionable, but let's face it, the right technology was very different in each of these scenarios. And I wouldn't have known that without the input that Alina had as an anthropologist, and vice versa. So we love that.
Absolutely.
And we didn't know the answer as we came into this. And I think the answers we found are interesting and big opportunities. Yeah. So with that, yeah, we just want to say thank you and really appreciate everybody listening in.
Thank you so much, Alina and Josh. That was incredibly insightful. We're going to now take some questions that our audience has on the presentation. Again, please go ahead, type your questions into the questions box. If we don't get to answer your question on this call, someone from Lux will be in touch after the webinar. Let's see. We're getting a number of questions coming in. Oh, this is a good one. All right, here it is. So Alina, Josh, how do we embed this belief-based segmentation into global innovation pipelines without slowing down things like speed to market?
Right, that's a great question. And you can think like belief-based segmentation isn't really about adding more layers. It's about sharpening focus early in the process so that you make smarter decisions faster. And many of our clients integrate this belief-based segmentation into the front end of their pipeline. And they don't do that as extra steps, but as a smarter filter. It helps them filter concepts by answering to questions like, does this offer a belief that we know drives behavior across markets? And if it doesn't, then it's deprioritized, right? And that actually speeds up the go, no-go decisions and reduces the risk of later stage misfires. It also helps answer the question, well, does this belief manifest differently in different countries? And then if yes, how? And what does that mean for innovation? So take an example. Think of a global snack brand that's struggling to prioritize between multiple flavor innovation concepts across the globe. And traditional segmentation would tell them that, well, Gen Z in Brazil and Gen Z in UK should want the same thing. But then by looking at their beliefs and their needs, they might see that, well, in Brazil, Gen Z might view snacks as a self-reward after a long study day, right? So the emotional need there is, I've earned this. In the UK, they might see the snack as a mindful break, right? And the emotional need there is like, I need a reset, I need a break. So that really means that companies need to reframe which product ideas to prioritize in each market and avoid launching the same SKU and just see, well, let's see what sticks, right? So instead of testing 12 ideas everywhere, they just focus on 2 or 3 needs or belief-aligned platforms, and that does cut cost and decision cycles, right? So the result is faster, is more focused concept testing, and clearer internal alignment across regions.
Yeah, to me, the consensus between early stage innovation, marketing, product, that's the key here. And that's the piece. Again, we both come at this from different perspectives. When you think most companies are still siloed when it comes to connecting these dots, these methods that we're seeing can be truly impactful. And again, help a R&D team to position an innovation to communicate to the marketing team the value, and vice versa, to say, hey, we need this and here's why we need this. When you begin to connect those dots, things move much smoother. You make better things, you challenge your assumptions, and you come out with a much better result.
That's really, again, very insightful, really helpful. So I think we have time for one more question today. And I think this is another really good one for both of you. So we're asking, what's the right balance between global coherence and local flexibility when beliefs manifest differently across different regions?
Yeah, that's a question we get quite often. So we can think of it as beliefs giving you that global emotional anchor, like that, but at the same time, it gives you the local flexibility on how that belief or that anchor is expressed in different geographies. So if we are to think about chocolate, let's say that your global platform is indulgence that feels right, right? So indulgence, that belief may be shared, but it shows up differently. We saw in Germany, it means sustainably sourced, it means heritage brands, certifications. In China, it translates to beautifully packaged chocolate that's meant for gifting. In the US, is bold flavors, right? So rather than creating completely different strategies for each market, the belief-based playbook lets you pivot expression without changing the core. So I think this is key. Like you can pivot the expression, the way it manifests without changing that core, right? Teams aren't left guessing. They're interpreting from a shared blueprint, right? And this is how brands like Ferrero Rocher, for example, maintain coherence, but they're still able to deeply resonate with consumers in markets like China.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would just add, we think about what's happening right now in the world, maybe moving towards nationalistic, or maybe it's not quite nationalistic, definitely regionalistic perspectives on innovation. And what comes to mind for that? It comes to innovation hubs. And if you look at innovation hubs today, most are focused on grand challenges, overcoming some industrial process, something like that. What they fail to have in a lot of cases is this type of information that we've talked about today. And as I said, with regional innovation changing and shifting, and you want products to hit and you need them to hit and your resources are limited, this type of information moving into early stage innovation can be absolutely critical, both to direct companies to fund the right type of innovators, right, into those innovation hubs, and reorganize with some of these perspectives in mind. And I think it's a potential frame shift for how we think about innovation hubs in the world. Most don't really have the consumer regional needs included in them as they select them. So I think there's a real opportunity here.
Thank you both so much. That's all the time that we have today. That concludes our webinar for today. The slide presentation and recording from the webinar will be sent to all of the attendees via email later today. After leaving the webinar, everyone will be prompted to complete a survey on today's presentation, and we would really appreciate any feedback that you may have that informs and improves, that allows us to inform and improve our future webinars. Please take a moment, check out our upcoming webinars. We have a lot of good stuff on the horizon. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Have a great day.